and the administration have been in constant communication with Ms. Rodriguez and other members of the interim government in Venezuela. They have been extremely cooperative. They have thus far met all of the demands and requests of the United States and of the president.
Okay, so the Nobel Committee just made an absolutely devastating move against the Trump White House. And what we're seeing right now is a full-blown international credibility crisis playing out in real time. This isn't some minor diplomatic spat or symbolic protest. This is the Nobel Peace Prize Committee publicly condemning a sitting American president for what they're calling a deliberate attempt to undermine and steal recognition from someone they believe truly deserves it. And the person at the center of this? A Venezuelan figure the committee is now calling a hero, while Trump's team is in absolute damage control mode, trying to contain the fallout. Now, before we dive into what actually happened here, I need to be straight with you about something. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. They're either going to bury this story because it makes the administration look bad, or they're going to spin it in a way that protects their access to the White House. That's exactly why we built US Power Alert, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. We're not here to tell you what to think. We're here to give you the full picture so you can make up your own mind. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines and get the kind of analysis you won't find anywhere else, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring the news straight to you every single day, breaking down the power moves, the backroom deals, and the institutional battles that actually shape your life. Just hit the subscribe button below to join us. And here's the thing, if you want to support this work and be part of a community that truly cares about the truth, this is your moment. Subscribe right now. Here's what happened. The Norwegian Nobel Committee, the group that awards the Nobel Peace Prize every year, just issued what can only be described as an extraordinary public statement. They're accusing the Trump administration of engaging in a coordinated campaign to discredit their 2025 Peace Prize selection and to essentially steal credit for peace efforts that, according to the committee, had absolutely nothing to do with Trump or his policies. The recipient they're defending? A Venezuelan opposition leader and humanitarian worker who, the committee says, risked everything to bring food, medicine, and hope to millions of people suffering under the Maduro regime while the world looked away. But here's where this gets absolutely wild. According to multiple sources close to the committee and leaked internal communications that started circulating in Oslo and Brussels, the Trump White House apparently launched a behind-the-scenes effort immediately after the prize was announced to reframe the narrative. The goal, according to these sources, was to make it look like Trump's Venezuela policy, his sanctions strategy, his maximum pressure campaign, was actually responsible for creating the conditions that allowed this Venezuelan hero to do their humanitarian work. In other words, the White House wanted to take credit for the Peace Prize without Trump's name actually being on it. The Nobel Committee is not having it. In their statement, which is incredibly rare because the committee almost never comments publicly on political reactions to their choices, they said, and I'm paraphrasing the key parts here, that the prize was awarded specifically for humanitarian work that often operated in direct opposition to international pressure campaigns. That the recipients' efforts were about alleviating human suffering caused by both the Maduro regime and the economic collapse made worse by international sanctions, and that any attempt to claim credit for this work by foreign governments fundamentally misunderstands and dishonors what the recipient actually did. Then they went further. The committee said that they had become aware of efforts by certain state actors. They didn't name the United States directly in the first statement, but everyone knew exactly who they were talking about, to pressure Nobel laureates, to manipulate media coverage of the prize, and to create a false historical record about the origins of the peace efforts being recognized. They called this behavior an assault on the integrity of the Nobel Peace Prize and the independence of the committee itself. And then, in what can only be described as an extraordinary escalation, committee members started giving interviews to European media. One member told a Norwegian broadcaster that they had received what they described as threatening communications from intermediaries claiming to represent American interests, suggesting that Norway's relationship with the United States could be affected if the committee didn't adjust its public messaging about the prize. Another member told a Swedish newspaper that the pressure campaign was unlike anything they'd experienced in decades, that it felt coordinated, persistent, and designed to intimidate. Now, the Trump administration, as you can imagine, is absolutely losing it over this. The initial response from the White House was to dismiss the whole thing as European elites being mad that Trump's tough policies actually worked. They put out a statement saying that Trump's maximum pressure campaign on Venezuela created the space for humanitarian workers to operate, that without American leadership, the situation would be even worse, and that the Nobel Committee was playing politics by refusing to acknowledge reality. But then the story started to get more complicated. Reporters began digging into what exactly the White House did after the prize was announced. And what they found was a pretty extensive operation. According to sources who spoke to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and several European outlets, the White House communications team reached out to conservative media figures, think tanks, and even some Nobel laureates from previous years to try to build a narrative that Trump's Venezuela policy deserved recognition as a contributing factor to the peace work being honored. They apparently also worked through diplomatic channels to have friendly governments make statements connecting the prize to Trump's policies. There were coordinated social media campaigns with hashtags trying to trend things like Trump's peace legacy and Venezuela's success story. And, according to the most damaging leaks, there were back-channel communications with Norwegian officials suggesting that U.S. support for various Norwegian priorities, things like Arctic security cooperation and trade agreements, could be contingent on Norway not letting the Nobel Committee embarrass the president. Now, here's where you need to understand the context, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. The Nobel Peace Prize has always been political. The committee is appointed by the Norwegian parliament, but they're supposed to operate independently. They've given the prize to controversial figures before. They've made choices that angered powerful countries before. But what's different here is the scale and the directness of the pressure campaign, and the fact that it's coming from the United States, a country that historically has had enormous influence in Oslo, and that Norway depends on for security guarantees through NATO. For the Nobel Committee to go public like this, to essentially accuse a sitting American president of trying to corrupt the integrity of the prize, is absolutely unprecedented in modern times. This is a committee that stayed silent when authoritarian regimes complained about dissidents winning the prize. They stayed quiet when China went ballistic over Liu Xiaobo getting the award. They've never responded this aggressively to pressure before. The fact that they're doing it now tells you just how serious they believe this threat to their independence actually is. And there's another layer here that's making this a much bigger crisis for the White House than it might seem on the surface. The Venezuelan recipient of this prize is not some generic humanitarian worker. According to the committee's detailed citation and the background materials they released, this person spent years building grassroots networks to distribute food and medicine in areas where both the Maduro government and international sanctions had created catastrophic shortages. They worked with local churches, community organizations, and underground networks to keep people alive. They documented human rights abuses. They sheltered political refugees. They organized peaceful resistance. And here's the key detail that the committee keeps emphasizing. This work often happened despite international pressure campaigns, not because of them. The committee's citation specifically notes that economic sanctions, while intended to pressure the Maduro regime, made the humanitarian situation worse for ordinary Venezuelans, and that this laureate's work was about mitigating that suffering regardless of its political source. In other words, the committee is saying that Trump's maximum pressure campaign, his sanctions, his efforts to economically strangle the Maduro government, actually made this person's humanitarian work harder and more dangerous, not easier. That completely contradicts the narrative the White House is trying to sell. Trump's people want to say that tough American policies created space for change and humanitarian access. The Nobel Committee is saying the exact opposite, that American policies made the crisis worse, and that the real heroes were the people on the ground trying to keep communities alive, despite the chaos created by both Maduro and international sanctions. Now let's break down what this actually means, because the implications here go way beyond one prize and one statement. First, understand that this is a massive credibility crisis for Trump on the international stage. The Nobel Peace Prize, whether you agree with their choices or not, carries enormous symbolic weight globally. It's one of the most recognized awards in the world. For the committee that grants that prize to publicly accuse your administration of trying to corrupt the process, of trying to steal credit, of threatening a small NATO ally, to manipulate historical records, that is devastating to American soft power and to Trump's personal brand as a deal maker and a leader. This isn't like domestic political fights, where Trump can just attack the media or the courts and his base doesn't care. This is an international institution with a 100-plus-year history calling out the American president by name, well, by implication. But everyone knows exactly who they're talking about. And they're doing it in a way that frames Trump not as strong or effective, but as insecure, dishonest, and willing to bully small countries to protect his ego. Second, this puts European allies in an incredibly awkward position. Norway is a NATO member. They depend on American security guarantees, especially as tensions with Russia remain high in the Arctic. For the Nobel Committee to go, this public means they believe the threat to their independence is serious enough that they're willing to risk a diplomatic incident with Washington. That tells you that whatever pressure was being applied behind the scenes was significant enough to override Norway's usual caution about antagonizing the United States. But it also means that other European governments are now watching very closely to see how the Trump administration responds. If the White House escalates, if they start threatening Norway directly or punishing them economically or diplomatically for not controlling the Nobel Committee, that sends a message to every other European ally that Trump is willing to sacrifice long-standing partnerships to avoid embarrassment. That makes alliance management infinitely harder heading into 2026 and beyond. Third, this is a gift to Trump's critics, domestically and internationally. Democrats are already jumping on this, framing it as yet another example of Trump's authoritarian impulses, his inability to handle criticism, and his willingness to abuse American power for personal vanity projects. You're going to see ads in the 2026 midterms featuring the Nobel Committee's condemnation, alongside other examples of Trump allegedly pressuring allies and institutions to serve his personal interests. Internationally, countries that are already skeptical of Trump's leadership, whether that's in Latin America and parts of Europe and Africa, are going to use this as further evidence that the United States under Trump can't be trusted to respect international norms, that Trump's foreign policy is all about his personal brand and not about genuine partnerships or humanitarian concerns. Fourth, this completely undermines Trump's Venezuela policy narrative. The administration has been trying to sell the story that maximum pressure worked, that sanctions and diplomatic isolation forced Maduro to the negotiating table, or at least weakened his grip on power. The fact that the Nobel Committee is explicitly saying that those same policies made the humanitarian crisis worse, and that the real peace work happened despite American pressure, not because of it, that destroys the White House's preferred storyline. Now, Trump's team has to defend a policy that the most prestigious peace organization in the world is saying caused more suffering than it prevented. That's a brutal talking point for the administration to overcome, especially if the Venezuelan laureate starts giving interviews echoing the committee's position and describing how American sanctions made their work more dangerous and less effective. Fifth, this raises serious questions about the White House's use of diplomatic leverage. If the reports are true that the administration threatened Norway with consequences over the Nobel Committee's independence, that's a massive misuse of American power. You can't use NATO commitments and trade relationships as bargaining chips to manipulate an independent prize committee. That's exactly the kind of behavior that the United States has historically condemned when other countries do it. And if Norway starts providing evidence, emails, recordings, accounts from officials about the nature of those threats, this could become a genuine scandal. You could see congressional hearings, you could see European allies demanding explanations. You could see international organizations questioning whether the United States is a reliable partner or just another authoritarian-leaning power that uses threats and intimidation to get its way. Sixth, this is happening at exactly the wrong time for the Trump administration's international reputation. We're heading into 2026. The administration is trying to negotiate new trade deals, manage ongoing tensions with China, keep NATO unified in the face of Russian aggression, maintain support for various Middle East policies. All of that requires international trust and credibility. Getting publicly condemned by the Nobel Committee for trying to corrupt one of the world's most respected prizes does not help with any of that. Foreign leaders are already cautious about dealing with Trump because of his unpredictability and his transactional approach to alliances. Now they have a fresh example of the administration allegedly threatening a small ally over something as symbolic as a peace prize. That makes every negotiation harder because other countries are going to wonder if the United States can be trusted to respect their sovereignty and their institutions, or if everything is going to be leveraged and threatened the moment it serves Trump's political interests. Seventh, there's the domestic political fallout to consider. Trump's base probably doesn't care much about the Nobel Committee's opinion. They're going to see this as more evidence of global elites attacking Trump because he's too effective, too strong, too willing to put America first. But for persuadable voters, especially college-educated voters, suburban voters, independent voters, who are already skeptical of Trump's behavior and his temperament, this is another data point suggesting that Trump is unfit for the responsibilities of the presidency. The image of the President of the United States allegedly pressuring Norway to manipulate a humanitarian prize so he can take credit for someone else's courage is not a good look. It fits into a broader narrative about Trump's narcissism, his need for constant validation, his willingness to abuse power to serve his ego. That narrative has been politically damaging before, and this incident is only going to reinforce it heading into the midterms. Eighth, this has implications for how the media covers Trump's foreign policy going forward. Every time the administration tries to claim credit for some diplomatic success or humanitarian breakthrough, reporters are going to ask the obvious question: are you actually responsible for this? Or are you trying to steal credit again like you did with the Venezuelan Nobel laureate? That skepticism is going to make it much harder for Trump to shape the narrative around his foreign policy achievements, real or imagined. And ninth, there's the institutional precedent here. If the Trump administration gets away with this, if there are no consequences for allegedly threatening a NATO ally to corrupt an independent prize committee, that sets a horrifying standard for future presidents. It tells them that they can use American power to bully international institutions, to rewrite history, to claim credit for things they had nothing to do with, all without facing any real accountability. But if Congress pushes back, if European allies demand explanations, if this becomes a genuine scandal that limits Trump's ability to operate internationally, then maybe there's a chance to reinforce the norm that the United States doesn't behave like an authoritarian regime that threatens and manipulates to serve the leader's vanity. Now, here's what you should be watching over the next few weeks. First, watch how the Trump administration responds to the Nobel Committee's condemnation. Do they double down and attack the committee as biased and anti-American? Do they try to ignore it and hope it goes away? Do they escalate pressure on Norway to try to force some kind of retraction or clarification? The administration's next move will tell you a lot about how seriously they're taking this crisis and how willing they are to risk a broader diplomatic incident. Second, watch for more leaks about the specific nature of the pressure campaign. If Norwegian officials start going on the record with details about what the White House actually said and threatened, this story gets much bigger and much harder for Trump to dismiss as fake news or European bias. Concrete evidence of threats and intimidation could force congressional action and could give European allies the ammunition they need to push back on other Trump administration demands. Third, watch how the Venezuelan laureate responds. If they start giving interviews and backing up the Nobel Committee's position that American sanctions made their humanitarian work harder, that becomes an incredibly powerful counter-narrative to Trump's maximum pressure success story. It also makes it much harder for the administration to attack the committee without also attacking a humanitarian hero who risked their life to help people. Fourth, watch how other international institutions react. Does the United Nations weigh in? Do European governments make statements supporting the Nobel Committee's independence? Do other prize organizations or human rights groups start speaking out about pressure campaigns from powerful governments? If this becomes a broader international coalition defending institutional independence against Trump's alleged intimidation, that's a much bigger problem for the White House than just one committee in Oslo being upset. Fifth, watch the domestic political reaction. Do Democrats in Congress launch investigations into whether the administration misused diplomatic leverage to pressure Norway? Do Republican senators who care about NATO and transatlantic relationships start asking uncomfortable questions? Does this become a campaign issue in 2026, with candidates being forced to take positions on whether the president should have tried to manipulate the Nobel Prize? And sixth, watch how this affects ongoing negotiations and relationships. Does Norway start being less cooperative on other issues where the United States needs their support? Do other small NATO allies start wondering if they're next if they do something that embarrasses Trump? Does this make every international negotiation just a little bit harder because trust has been eroded one more time? So here's the bottom line. The Nobel Peace Prize Committee just did something almost unprecedented. They publicly condemned the Trump administration for allegedly trying to corrupt the integrity of their prize and steal credit from a humanitarian hero. They've accused the White House of threatening Norway, of manipulating media coverage, and of trying to rewrite history to serve Trump's ego. And they've done all of this in a way that directly contradicts the administration's preferred narrative about Venezuela policy and American leadership. This is a massive credibility crisis for Trump on the international stage. It undermines his foreign policy messaging. It gives ammunition to his critics. It raises serious questions about the misuse of American diplomatic power. And it creates yet another test of whether international institutions and American allies are willing to stand up to pressure and intimidation from the White House, or whether they're going to cave to protect their relationships with Washington. The stakes here go way beyond one prize and one statement. This is about whether the United States under Trump is going to be seen as a reliable partner that respects international norms and institutional independence, or as just another authoritarian-leaning power that uses threats and leverage to control narratives and claim credit it hasn't earned. And what happens next is going to tell us a lot about the state of American power, the strength of international institutions, and the willingness of allies to push back when they believe fundamental principles are at stake. This story is far from over. The Nobel Committee has drawn a line. Trump's team is in full damage control, and the world is watching to see who blinks first. Keep your eyes on this, because how it resolves could define American credibility on the world stage for years to come. And it could set the precedent for how future presidents are allowed to behave when their egos are threatened by international recognition of people who actually did the work. What do you think? Is the Nobel Committee right to go public like this? Or are they overstepping by getting involved in political fights? Should Trump's team be held accountable if the pressure campaign allegations are true? Or is this just how international diplomacy works? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's have a real discussion about what kind of behavior we should expect from the American president and what consequences there should be when those lines get crossed.